Welcome to A Lunch with Biggie, a podcast about small businesses and creatives sharing their stories and inspiring you. Today, I have the honor and the privilege to hang out with one of my good friends during my lunch break, Kelly Brott from Brott's Beard Care. He is the head beard, I would say, in his line of beard products. And I look forward to definitely chatting with him and introducing you guys to him and having him tell your story. Thank you so much, Kelly, for coming in and spending some time with me today.
Hey, Biggie, it's absolutely my pleasure, man.
Awesome, man. Well, we've known each other for a few years now. And so one thing I can definitely say is that I usually lean to you a lot because you've been doing events a way longer than I have. But before we get into those type of questions and ideas, one of the things that I had for you was I want you to be able to tell folks a little bit about how you started the business. I know you started in 2014. I kind of want to know how did you go about it? Like, what made you want to actually start, Brott's Beard Care?
Yeah. Well, actually, in 2014, when it kind of began, I really had no intention of it being a business. I was really just at that point, like most guys who, have grown out a beard or started growing a beard and was dealing with some of the frustrations of, the beard being itchy and just uncomfortable and wanting to keep it, but wanting to shave it because I didn't like how it felt. And I just knew that there had to be a product out there that would kind of help me with that. I tried all the traditional stuff like soaps and shampoos and lotions and things like that, and nothing ever really seemed to work. And it was around that time that I found my first beard oil. I think I spent somewhere between like $25 and $30 on it. And I got it, opened it up, and I absolutely hated it. The smell was just horrendous. And it's one of those companies that, they were one of the first and one of the biggest national companies doing it. And it just kind of, I guess in my search of finding them, I had come across some opportunities or some sites that kind of told you how to make your own product. And I really just started making it just for myself with absolutely no intention of it becoming a business. But when I did make it, I had a little bit of extra and I started just kind of sharing it with friends and they liked it. They were receptive to it. And I think that's when the light bulb kind of went off and I decided that, I might actually pursue it as a business.
That's awesome, man. And I was kind of curious. That was one of the big things I was trying to figure out was like, how did you come up? Like, how have you come up with like the formulas? Was it like YouTube? You just started basically YouTubing it, started just like looking things up. What made you kind of like, how did you even get to that point? Because, obviously when you're experimenting, like you said, you're not buying things in quantities of one. You have to, obviously grab a bunch. So it's like, where did you get all that research, do your research at?
Right. There were a couple of places. It all really was online, but as you mentioned, like YouTube was one good resource where you actually saw some videos of people, creating the formulas, and you could visually see it. A lot of websites, that had blogs and things like that you could read about it. And I really just started experimenting a little bit. I didn't really know what I was doing, but just kind of playing a little bit. And, once I kind of started to come across some things that worked well for me, then I started to want to take it a little bit more seriously. And I really tried to get out there and educate myself and figure out, what, oils would work well. There's some sites that I found that actually gave some suggestions on what essential oils blended well together. So it's kind of that old adage of, you don't have to, recreate the wheel. Someone's already done it. So I was able to kind of take some of their information and then make some adaptations, to do things that I wanted to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the big thing for you is the key, I think, when you're creating something is making it to your flavor, your style, your sense, things
Right.
that you're going to like. So it's like you kind of like at least learn the foundation from there. So that's great. Where do you actually get your inspiration from like the different scents and come up with? Because it's really been amazing to see from the time I've known you, and we've known each other now since I've started the business. So I want to say at least 6, 7 years. I've been in the business 8, but I started doing outdoor events, and you were one of the first ones that I kind of got drawn to and started talking to. And I've seen like the progression, like you kind of had, I think you initially started, with how many scents, and then now you've kind of where have you developed to?
Yeah. Well, as far as the number of scents, I mean, it all started with 1 scent, and that was the cinnamon vanilla blend. And that was really just a personal preference. I mean, I love this, the smell of cinnamon. When I started the business, I had 4 original scents that were part of my line. And then now I think if you add in my seasonal blends, I have somewhere close to 15 different variations. And as far as like getting inspiration, I mean, they come from different places. Some of them are, things that are, kind of popular in culture, like the chai tea latte kind of thing, or the pumpkin spice. Or if it's a holiday blend, I want to do something that is definitely more seasonal that way. A funny story is my most popular blend, the autumn wood, is something that an ex-girlfriend suggested, and I was really resistant to doing it because I just wasn't a fan of sandalwood.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, after we broke up, I started playing around with it, and it ended up being a scent that I really enjoyed. And to this day, it's my best selling scent. So
I can attest. It's actually it's one of the ones I have in my house. I actually have quite a collection of your oil. So depending on my mood, so it's definitely definitely great stuff. That's awesome. It's yeah, and I think that's kind of the one thing I think that I think is important to kind of to go is that you started off. I mean, obviously, everyone starts off with ideas of going bigger and grander, and sometimes you kind of have to harness yourself back in a little bit and be like, okay,
mhm.
let's start with like a foundation. Let's do these right first, and then from there, let's start building from there, and not over kind of getting to the point where you're overdoing it or overstepping your area, or over, kind of you don't want to overextend yourself really.
Absolutely. And for me, I mean, that's something I've done from the start with this business, in every aspect from, creating different scents to, how much inventory, how much product I make, even, what events I do. It's always been that process that, I wanted to kind of do it slow and steady and make sure that I almost in a sense mastered the craft along the way,
Yeah,
rather than kind of getting over my head and doing things that that weren't at the quality and level that I want them to be at.
makes sense. What one of the big things that I saw, and I know that obviously we have a pandemic now, but like I mentioned earlier, one of the ways that I met you was going and actually doing, was at events, and for you when you were looking at events and doing events, were there certain things or certain guidelines that you were kind of using to figure out like, hey, this event may be a good event for me? Is there any like are there any things that you're kind of learning, because obviously right now we're at a spot right now where people are starting to do more events like you and I are doing. I'm kind of I noticed that you're kind of doing more events than you were in 2020. Are there things that you are looking into of like, hey, I think this might be a good event for me? What are things that you think people should look out to or look into when they're looking at choosing a possible event to vend at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that really depends on who you are, kind of what stage you are in your business, and if you look at it kind of pre-pandemic, of doing 5 years of events, I got to the point where I could figure out, looking at an event, what was, if I was going to be successful at or not successful at. And for me, it really came down to, you know, a little bit of the, oddly enough, the age group of the people that were going to be shopping at the event. And for me, I was kind of, targeting that, 25 to maybe 50 or 60-year-old range. And that was really kind of the sweet spot. Anything older or younger than that, it just didn't really play well. You know, as you look at, things kind of coming out of the pandemic. Yeah. I mean, there was a time where, I didn't want to do any events because we just didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And then at this point, it's, I'm really just, I'm looking for opportunities. So, they may be events that I may not have, prior to the pandemic, I may not have done. But now I just want that exposure. I want to get out there and let people, kind of see my business again, and just kind of go from there. But yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I think is, as you're new in the business or you're new to events, you have to just really try a lot of stuff when it comes to the events to figure out what works best for you. Because I know you and I've done some events together, and there are certain events that I'll kill it at, and you'll have just an okay, event. And then vice versa, we'll go to one and you're just crushing it. And I'm like, okay, no one wants my beard stuff. So you really just have to you have to get out there and try it and see what works. And then, but keep track of it and figure out, and you'll learn, what works best for you and your product.
Yeah, and I think that's the way I've kind of looked at or taken events in the years of doing events and stuff is, obviously I always try to grab the positive of the event. So what can I learn from the event in the sense of maybe I learned something new to do, my setup, something to that effect. Maybe it's more people, I try to spin it in a positive way, like, even though maybe people didn't buy from me as much as I really want them to buy from me, I got to introduce myself to a lot of people, and a lot of people got to find out who
Right.
I was, tell people what my brand is about. And I think that's kind of really important to be able to look at when you're doing these things, is you're supposed to take the opportunity as a positive every single time that you're in front of the public, whether you're selling or not selling. I think it's very important to be able to have that aspect of the public being, it's another way of people, once again, brand exposure, people getting to know who you
Mhm.
are, know what your brand's about, getting to hear you talk, like, and especially for you, being able to tell them, hey, I make this, I do small batches, it's like, it's homemade, and like, and these are the things I do. And also the fact that, you're then able to then explain to them, this is how I came about it, came about these ideas. And it's like, numerous times I have people come to my events and just start asking me like, hey, what made you come up with that shirt, or what made you do this? And I enjoy that. And sometimes it doesn't lead to a sale, but it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that it doesn't stay there in your minds. They start following you on social media, and you
Right.
start having a conversation, right? And like, and that's one of the things that I love. Like, I love, a lot of times when I sell, I'm usually selling next to you. And so a lot of times I love hearing people, you being able to tell people about, like, hey, this is how I started, this is how I started it, this is what I
Mhm.
did. And then you can then go the route of like, hey, I now have the soap, and I now have beard balm,
Right.
and I think that's important. Start a business, we all want immediate gratification. However, like we were talking, it's like kind of like a slow build sometimes. How do you measure success?
Yeah. And, I couldn't agree more, man. People definitely, they love the story. They want to know, who the maker is and kind of the story behind it. And to me, I think that's what differentiates, my beard oil from the hundreds or thousands of other beard oils out there. Same thing for you. It distinguishes between someone buying your brand or your T-shirt or your hat versus, the thousands of options out there
Yeah.
for a product. And I love, kind of what you touched on there, saying that, you take the positive out of every like opportunity or event. Because yeah, I do the same thing. I mean, I've done a lot of events where, maybe at the end of the day, I look at the sales number and it's not the number that I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But if you think about, okay, I introduced, so many people to my business and now they know about it. And one thing that I've always really tried to do, and this kind of ties into, I think, one reason why I was able to do well during the pandemic without doing a lot of events, is I've always made sure that, when I have that interaction with somebody, even if they don't buy, or, well, if they buy and even if they don't buy, I always hand them a card. I let them know, what I do, that I offer, all of my products on the website, free shipping, and I always make sure that they are aware of that. So even if they don't buy from me that day, then they know about the other avenues or channels where they can find me or get my product.
Yeah, and I think I absolutely agree. I think it's like you're always on. It's always another opportunity to tell someone. The other big thing is when you were talking about your customers and the demographic. One of the things that I find interesting is that a lot of times it's not like, yeah, it's, you would think it automatically, you would think, okay, it's the bearded guy 25, like a bearded person, the bearded guy. But in
Mhm.
reality, one of your big customers is really, it's the female population, because they're the ones that don't know what to buy someone. So kind of touch on that, like on that aspect of like, did you think of that when you originally, like, was that something that you kind of realized, or as time went on, obviously you started realizing like, oh, like I'm getting, it's not just the one population, it's actually females as well that are like just as important in selling my product.
It's funny that you say that because that is not something I expected at all. I think when I, you know, did my first event, I thought, okay, I'm just going to be talking to a bunch of guys with beards and they're going to buy my product. I quickly figured out that that was not the case. When you look at the types of events we do, I think there are a lot more females that come to those events and shop than there are males in general. But also, the product is definitely, I mean, when somebody walks up to my table, no matter whether they have a beard, whether they're male or female, I mean, that's a potential person because,
Hmm.
I have women come up and say, well, I don't have a beard. And I'll say, but do you know somebody with a beard? And they're like, oh yeah, I do. My brother or my boyfriend or my father or somebody. And you're right. I mean, this is a great gift for someone. And if I can, talk to any person and let them know about it, then that definitely, is an opportunity that for me to let somebody know about my, what I have to offer. But yeah, I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but
Yeah.
I bet if I was able to run a report and tell you, how many men and how many women purchase my product, it's probably over 50% are women that are buying it for somebody.
That's awesome. Obviously, no conversation with me can be complete without having the conversation of sandwiches. So, I need to know, what do you have? Do you have a favorite sandwich? Is it something that you typically eat or enjoy? Obviously, not when you're selling, but when you have an opportunity to enjoy a good sandwich.
Well, who says you can't eat a sandwich while you're selling,
Well, it's
But I
it,
mean,
it becomes tough when I do that. Like I'm
it
never a
is.
fan of eating and selling because
Right.
I feel like they always get me when I'm like with my mouth, like I'm taking a bite and then you're like, and you're like, and you want to talk to them and then they don't want to they don't want to bother you. So then I
Right.
just don't eat, basically is what happens. I just end up drinking protein drinks and snacks,
Yeah.
is what I end up doing.
Well, my years of working in retail have given me that experience of how to eat super fast and eat when you can. But to talk about like my favorite sandwich, for me, it's a muffalata.
Okay.
And it's just kind of that combination of the different meats on there that give you that the kind of the salty aspect of it. The olive tapenade is amazing. I love a muffalata that's they toast the bread a little bit, so it's got a
Hmm.
little bit of a crunch to it as
Oh
well.
yeah.
But yeah, that's by far my favorite sandwich. But I mean, there's a ton of other sandwiches that I love to eat as well. So
Yeah. No, I totally get that. What I guess what's one for thinking when you're like, one of the big things I think that I find humorous, like even when we last sold together, one of the big things that I always appreciate is that the little things that people learn from us. And obviously and I'm always learning as well. So like we're always obviously you're always learning, and I feel like I'm always soaking in when I go to an event. Like I see what other vendors are doing. But I kind of wanted to kind of get an idea, because one of the things that I always find humorous is that you and I obviously use bed risers
right,
for our tables, and I think it blows people's minds when they think about like it's like the little things like that we learn from folks, and it's something that I'm always wanting to share. I'm like, hey, you should get a bed riser, because if you put a bed riser on the table, no one wants to bend down, especially in your products, being, small, being a lot smaller,
right.
you want them to be a little bit higher up. What other things would you recommend, or, especially since people are doing more outdoor events, what tips or suggestions would you give someone for, having this when they're selling outside, to be prepared for, to make life a little bit easier, or maybe become a little bit more successful?
Oh wow. It's so funny that you say that because there's so many, and over the years, sometimes you lose track of where you learned about a certain tip or what a certain tip is. But yeah, the bed risers, for me are amazing because it does just elevate that product and bring it up, at a higher level, closer to the customer. Um, I've got a great set of lights that I use. For night events, and it was actually another vendor that you and I both know that kind of turned me on to those. And I mean, they're super easy to put up. They're plastic. They don't break. They're really bright, and they're camping lights is essentially what they are. But no one else has ever had them. Like I've only seen two vendors, put
Yeah.
those on their tents. Um, Gosh, I don't know. I mean, for me, like my one thing that's helped me a little bit is my tablecloth that I use is like a polyester that's wrinkle free. So I don't have to iron it. I don't have to worry about it ever, looking nice
Yeah.
or being wrinkled. So that's one thing that kind of makes things a little bit easier. I think even just whatever you can do to organize yourself and simplify, your display as much as you can kind of help take some of that pressure off of the setup and the tear down and all that, and you can actually enjoy the experience of the day.
And I think also one of the big ones, which I always remember hearing stories from you telling me about, hey, I went to this event and the person didn't bring weights or weigh down their tent and it got windy and it just literally went off and like flew away like a kite. I never forget that, and I'm always because of that. I always make sure, even like of course, if I'm doing an indoor event, then I won't bring it. But if I'm doing an outdoor event, like there's always something attached to the feet of my tent for that reason.
Yeah. It's funny you say that is yesterday, I did an event yesterday and the vendor next to me didn't have any tent weights and the winds were 15 to 20-mile-an-hour winds. And the first thing is I'm helping her kind of put up her tent. I was like, hey, do you have your weights with you? And she's like, oh, no, I didn't bring any weights. And I'm like, uh-oh. Um, so she had kind of the strings,
Yeah.
on her tent. So we tied her strings to my weights. And then there was actually a piece of kind of a wooden frame behind. So we actually had her tied down on three different sides. And there were times where the wind would blow her tent and it kind of lifted it up. And if we hadn't tied them to my stuff, it would have blown away. But I think, the one thing to keep in mind, and it all depends on where you're doing events. With you and I being in Florida, the weathers and the storms can be really unpredictable.
Yeah.
So for me, the one thing that makes it successful is to be prepared for anything. So your tent weights, because you never know when the wind's going to come along. Having sides for your tent. Something that I learned from some of the local farmers markets is they actually suggest that you have like a blue tarp, that is, if the wind comes or rain comes along really fast and you don't have time to cover anything up, you can just whip that tarp out and just cover your stuff really fast. So really it's just about being prepared, for anything that could potentially happen to the event.
That's really actually really smart yeah, especially in my world when it rains, I freak out because with all my shirts and everything, it's definitely a difficult situation. So I totally get that. If someone were, I guess my big thing would be if you from what you've learned, because you've been doing this now for what, over 7 years?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's about 6.5 years
Okay.
if you take it back to the time where I just started making product for myself. Yeah.
If you were
Um,
talking to Kelly, like the Kelly of now, based on all the knowledge and everything you've learned, to talk now to the Kelly you starting out, what advice do you think you'd give yourself? Would what are things that you're like, man, I really wish I knew this, or I really would tell myself this? Is there anything that you would kind of want to share with yourself? If you as you were starting on this journey of doing beard care.
yeah. You know, um, this is actually something I learned along the way, and I now have kind of adopted it, and I sort of practice this myself. But early on, when I was creating this business, I mean, it's a form of putting yourself out there, and I was always really concerned with everything that I every label, every name, everything had to be perfect. And I don't know where I heard this, but somebody along the way said, hey, you know what? It's never for you. It's never going to be perfect. And sometimes you just have to just get it out there and just see what happens. Because you can always change, you can always adjust, you can always make improvements. And so for me it's just, my advice to myself and anyone starting out is just get started. Just get something out there, get it going, and then you can kind of figure out and make those tweaks and adjustments to get it the way you want it to be.
You
But
know,
if you wait until everything is perfect, you never get started and you'll never do it.
that is like so true. I actually gave myself one of my things that my mantras that I've been trying to follow, or one of my little goals of the year, is telling myself progress, not perfection. I basically, move forward. That's actually one of the reasons, and that's a perfect like kind of share, because I was just telling you before we started, I actually recorded with you a year ago exactly, a podcast, same similar concept of what I'm doing right exactly now, a year ago. And I basically made myself want to be like, oh no, it's not perfect. I don't have this, I don't have that. And I gave myself every excuse there was to never start. And until I kind of came to this idea that you're basically realization, obviously you're way wiser than I am, was that, hey, it doesn't have to be perfect, just start it and it'll get better. And that's kind of exactly how this podcast even started with it. And
Right.
that's why I was like excited to have you on, because then it's like I finally can actually air this, or at least like publish this so people can listen to it, which I think is awesome. So yeah, I definitely think it's going to be, it's definitely something that I appreciate, and I totally agree with you on that aspect of that for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about, because when you were talking about, you kind of had it in the back, I had it in the back of my mind after you mentioned things about having to do with how you've progressed and built. One of the things that I've noticed that you've kind of gotten more involved with is actually getting more creative in your beard oils. I know I just saw recently that based on some of your videos and stuff, that they would be that you started using a whiskey barrel, like you started using a barrel for it.
Right.
So go on. So we were talking about your barrels that you started using for your oils.
Yeah. So, that was just, I don't even know exactly where the light bulb, kind of went off on that, but, part of it was just over the years, I had, different customers and people that I would interact with that had asked me, hey, can you ever do something that smells like, whiskey, or can you do something that smells like bourbon? Um, and I think I've come across a couple of beard companies that have done something similar to that, but I didn't quite really know their process. But yeah, it just, it was something I wanted to try, and I wanted it to be unique. And what I ended up doing, and I'm going to continue to do, is, I basically purchased a little 1 liter oak whiskey barrel that is made that you can age, any kind of whiskey or liquor in there. And I just wanted it to kind of tap into that whole, small batch, handcrafted, very artisanal type, product. So yeah, so I took a whiskey and I aged it in that barrel for a couple of months, which is kind of the equivalent of a year of aging a whiskey in a larger barrel. Took that whiskey out, and then I added my base kind of unscented beard oil into that, and let that age for a couple of months, and just to see what would happen. And I didn't know if it was going to work. It wasn't that big of a risk because I was doing kind of a small batch on it, which is, again, getting back to that do things in small steps and kind of build on it. And it actually worked out really well. I sold my last bottle of it a couple of days ago.
That's awesome.
I've got a spiced rum that's aging in a barrel right now. So kind of for a Father's Day release, I'm going to do a spiced rum aged, beard oil. Again, I don't know if it's going to work. I won't really know for a couple months until I pull it out of the barrel. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, you know what, it's just one of those things that you learn along the way. But yeah, I've always felt like I wasn't a person that was creative. Like, I'm not an artist, I can't sing, I can't play music, anything like that. But I think in my own way, I think that I do have some creativity when it comes to, seeing things like that I like and want to do, and I'm able to kind of identify it and be creative in my own way, which I think that's the cool thing about, doing your own business. Everybody's got, a cool, unique talent or creativity that they can, kind of, showcase in some way.
For sure. Kelly, share with our listeners where they can find you, where they can interact with you, maybe ask if they have any beard care tips or need help, they can reach out to you. Where can they find you on social and website?
Yeah, so on across social, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, my handle is @Brott's Beard Care. Also, they can reach out to me through my website, which is brottsbeardcare.com. But yeah, I welcome any questions, comments. For me, it's not, obviously it's a business, and I'm trying to sell my product, but for me, it's more about just that education. If I can talk to somebody and provide them some kind of information to help them, with their beard journey, then that's really what's, the fun thing for me with all of that.
Yeah, and I definitely I'm starting to like all the videos of you kind of telling people a little bit about some of the stuff, especially since I think one of the nice things about it is that with you doing some of the videos and the reels, people are experiencing or seeing the same effect or the same experience that they would have if they met you one on one or met you at an event. They can still get that experience just from hearing, you know, kind of where the thought process was for those events online. So I think that's really, really, really great. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for Kelly from Brott's Beard Care for being on and having lunch with me. Definitely make sure to check them out online, brottsbeardcare.com. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe. Definitely check out Kelly and his stuff. If you have a beard, I definitely recommend it. I've been using his stuff for, you know, so he's been in business for almost 7 years. I've been wearing it for about 7 years. And if you definitely like the show and you want to support me, by all means, besides subscribing, check out delifreshthreads.com and do some shopping and tell your friends. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Kelly, for your time. And remember, keep eating sandwiches and follow your passion. See you guys next week. Thanks, guys.